Hi, how are you? This is Damaris Maria Grossman, and this is the Mindfully Integrative Show. And today we have an amazing guest for our mindful chat. Her name is Kriston, and she is not only a speech pathologist, but she's also a yoga and wellness enthusiast. And she kind of has integrated this into her practice with her patients and into her life. So I really can't wait for you guys to meet her. Hey, Lauren, how are you?
I'm well. Thank you so much, Damaris. Thank you for having me.
Of course. I'm so glad you were able to kind of join in. And I love for people to learn more about you. But let's kind of get into like a little fun fact that people might not know if they went and looked you up.
Okay. A fun fact would be that I actually started out in education for teaching elementary. I was maybe halfway through my program there, and I kind of decided to do a little shift and change paths. So that's something interesting. And then also that I would say I played violin for maybe like 15 years. Yeah. And so I'm always looking like little ways to get back into it. But it was a really meaningful time in my life. And a lot of people are always very surprised to hear that. So definitely a big background in music. And I
That's
just
so
think that,
beautiful.
yeah.
Love violin. Oh,
Yeah.
that's so cool. Yeah, I'm hoping that my son gets into string instruments because my husband plays. And God, that's so beautiful. Violin's difficult to play.
Yeah, it's super involved, very complex. And I studied at the Garden State Academy. I don't know if there's still an active studio academy rather, but it was a pretty rigorous. And I just remember like my mom setting the kitchen timer for like 30 minutes a day and practicing. So it was involved. And that's probably got a little bit to do with, right? Like I think just letting a child be led to whatever instrument like resonates with them, right? Because we have
Yeah.
these ideas of like, hey, I'd love for my child to do this. So I was very fortunate, very lucky for my mom to, expose me to that at an early age. Yeah. But my grandmother will always make a joke. She's like, yeah, you're like 3 years old in your recitals and everybody's bows are going up and Lauren's is going down. Right. So it's just super funny. It's like,
Oh, just learning how to.
yeah.
That's super cute. Aw. Yeah, I wasn't super talented on that end, but my husband's definitely the more of the music genius in the family.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
How so obviously this is an integrative health show, but I always love having people on the show to talk about things that they're doing. And you and I have touched base and connected through acupuncture office, Jennifer Layne's, but also because we believe in an alternative and an integrative wellness for others. So please tell me what you're doing now, like kind of what got you to your story, because you're a speech pathologist, and explain to people what that is, and then kind of where your story came to transition from what you've been doing to now.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. So as a speech and language pathologist, it's interesting because I was trained at New York Medical. So you're talking like training with the med students. We did like the gross anatomy and the cadaver and all of that, right? So the goal was I'm going to work in a hospital and typically with adult patients. Post CVA, post stroke, TBI, all of that. And while I had a great time and I really do enjoy that line of work, after studying, I find again, this is one of those moments where life just kind of puts you and leads you where you need to be. Fast forward several years later, and I am crisscross applesauce on people's living room floor conducting early intervention for birth to 3, like playing with Play-Doh. So that's a little bit of like how I got involved with speech therapy. I was always involved in healthcare, one aspect or the other. Like before school, I worked in a group home with adults with developmental disabilities. So it's always something that's been really, truly near and dear to my heart. But I was always interested in this idea of like how people communicate. And I do think something that a lot of people, even like friends of mine, don't know is that when I was younger, my stepbrother had CP, cerebral palsy. So he never spoke, he never moved, he was bedridden, right? And so I learned at a very, very, very early age that people communicate, whether it's verbally or non-verbally. So I do feel for many reasons, I was definitely led into this field. And I think mostly when I started working with the little ones with birth to 3, that's when I kind of realized this whole God, these kids, like, if they're having a moment, they intuitively soothe themselves. And you've seen this, I'm sure, going into these
Yeah.
postures, these
I
yoga
know we should
poses.
talk about this. I mean, we connected because we both worked with little ones, and that
Yeah.
was a big connection with us. Yeah. So
Yeah.
these little guys are talking and communicating, and what did you see with that?
I just saw like the need to kind of have a moment, and, whether it was, if they were having a moment where somebody might call it a tantrum or a meltdown, right? It's less of this model of like putting them in a timeout. It's like, all right, let's take a pause. Let's take a moment and like tune in, right? Like a time in, like what's happening for them. And I saw innately like these soothing mechanisms that were existing for them, and whether it was like putting themselves into like a little child's pose or hugging their knees or whatever it was. So that's really a big part of my practice, is trying to find ways to work with, yes, a more, if you want to call it like a more medically driven model, but as well, like those Eastern philosophies of like the whole child, right? And helping them,
Yes.
yeah, communicate in that way for sure. Because they have a lot to say, whether it's verbally or non-verbally or just somewhere in between, right? So, and that's a little bit of the work with the parents that I do, is like this active listening.
And it's so important because I think there's a lot of individuals out there who say, I'm listening, I hear you. And you're like, are you actively really taking that time? You know?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, we're both yogis, so we'll talk about that soon. But that intuitive thinking and that listening part, it takes some time and practice, right? And teaching the parents and family. Is that challenging?
It depends kind of how receptive, and I
Yeah,
find that a lot of the parents, like in our age group, and even some of the younger parents, especially, like they are very receptive and very
great.
open to this way of helping their children and assisting their children in whatever modality, whatever it is,
Right.
they're to incorporate it. So I do find that everybody seems to be, for the most part, very receptive, and are like, hey, you have some tools for me? Let's hear it.
Yeah, I mean, I was just telling you before, I'm like, oh my gosh, you help moms. I mean, like, Lauren, you help moms and these kids that, to help them communicate in the most open and expressive way. Um, and you kind of came up with your own little thing because you know, we didn't fully talk about your full story. So you know your family, and then you were saying that you're a speech pathologist, but you're also a yoga teacher. So how did you incorporate it? Because you call it SPOGA, right? You've kind of
Yeah.
trademarked it a little bit. So talk about
Yeah,
that a little bit for me.
absolutely. Yeah, so through my own desire and exploration with yoga, I kind of decided to start incorporating bits and pieces of that, for speech therapy for my clients. So SPOGA is this combination of speech therapy and yoga. And I have different classes and groups and kind of programs, but within it, really, it's this idea of communicating mindfulness, right? And I definitely am very inspired by Maria Montessori here. And she says something really profound: the real preparation for education is the study of oneself. So I think it's this idea of teaching both parents and then children in real time about how to navigate some of their emotions and the things that at times can somewhat interfere with the learning process. So I really love that whole idea of like integrative, right? The speech therapy and the yoga. So again, it's like using the stimulus of movement at times, whether it's through yoga postures, and then this application of relaxation. So helping them find their breath, just take a moment. And I always tell everybody, even though I work with little kids and moms, I also work with, a lot of women in our age group, and honestly in their 60s. And it's like your pauses carry power. Like there is just this moment that if we can like tune in and listen, I think it's a huge bonus for us. So SPOGA really works on developing children who are mindful doers, and then again this piece of active listeners, right? So yeah, I really do. I think it's very helpful for them. And it's like the kid that's always getting up in class and doing this and doing that. It's like, well, have we checked in with their sensory system? Are they really even paying attention yet? It's like we have all these other things, these tools that can help them. So that's definitely where I try and come in and kind of help them communicate.
It's amazing. I mean, I think that every kid learns differently and they express themselves, and you're kind of finding their own. I mean, emotional intelligence is
Yeah.
pretty. It's not. It's hard. It's not always taught, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
to be a parent, and then you being a provider and a guide to help these parents, it's important. It's really important. So you're
Yeah.
like not just teaching them about communicate, but emotionally communicate and expressing themselves. That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So would you like to talk a little bit, of your journey in that, like how your communication changes or how like a path or, or a client or both? Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I could also give the example of a parent. We actually just stopped working together. Her daughter was doing really great, but we still keep in close contact. And she made a joke. She's like, you signed on to be her speech therapist, but really, you were my therapist and guiding me in the language that I use to, elicit some more communication from her. And so, kind of working with that model of like mindful communication, that's a big part for me. And then my own personal experience is like seeing myself, how much more regulated that I can be once I have used that stimulus of movement or that application of relaxation, whether it's breath work or even a meditation. Um, Children are just so receptive, and in my work, we're both in medical, in the acute care and subacute, with the older population. And then this very young population, I find that people who are coming into lifespan and on your way out transitioning, like they just tend to be very porous, very receptive, very open. So it's never like the kids are not online. They're already online, and we're just kind of teaching them and modeling in a very mindful way, right? So it's kind of how to use their language, how to be more involved with their social interactions, and developing that theory of mind, right? Like, hey, there's another way that I could do this, or maybe mommy has a different thought about this. But again, these are things that children they're learning, right? They're learning as they go. And I think, gosh, if we had this kind of stuff when going back in the day, right, that would have surely benefited somebody like myself. I was a very visual learner, right? So in school, I had a hard time with all of this instruction and this auditory comprehension piece. It was really a lot for me to absorb. And while I was able to hack it at New York Medical, right, I found myself studying for longer than other students. So that's really kind of when I honed in on like this mindfulness, this meditation, the yoga, and it helped me. And I thought, hey, you know what? If we could get them started a little bit earlier and give them some tools. So that was really my purpose behind this.
Love it. I mean, I can relate to you on that, being a different kind of learner. I talk about that with my husband and I. We say like, yeah, just the way that we learned or the way I learned was very different. I also was more on the visual. I have to get through my programs, my doctoral program, I had to do audio visual. So I had my papers read to me.
Yes.
So, and where I look visually audio. So when I was writing, so like I even do text to speech. So I had to
Yep.
completely, I grew up with a disability, and it was like, oh my gosh, the, overcoming that is huge, and then being able to see that your mindfulness and all these techniques change your way of learning for yourself, but then teaching other people. I think it's
Absolutely.
profound, and that's why it's like these little tips are so important. Um, would you like to? I mean, I'm going to have all your information in the show notes for those who reach you. But would you like to, go over, because you're a wonderful yoga teacher and you're a therapist. I just like a mindful tip. I say mindful way that you would love to share with the audience before you have to go, or if you have more to share, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say my mindful tip would be to just, whether you're a parent or just somebody exploring yoga and mindfulness, it's like giving yourself that moment to kind of pause, settle in, and take a breath. One of my favorite teachers, elder teachers, says, like, taking a breath is so important. It's the first thing we do as we come in, and one of the last things we do on the way out. So when you really get to work with your breath, right? It's always like check in where your breath is. Are you really like up here in the more like chest modality, right? And just trying to ground everything down a little bit. And any little mindful ways, whether it's having a little visual referent for yourself and having it on the refrigerator. I find that we are so inundated with information, right, in today's culture and in our society, rather. So it's like having those mindful moments, having that moment to like see, how am I breathing here? Can I just allow this to just have a moment? And I always say that, the kids do really, really well naturally with this when they're guided. And I think in our kind of area, the work that we do, it's like as much as we can help them, right? It's just finding the breath, finding a moment. Your pauses do carry power. And then from there, right, true learning occurs. So that's really.
That's so profound. Yeah, the true learning, and then you're saying, they kind of find themselves, so then they can express and be better for others, like, and for themselves down the road. And I do love Montessori too. It's a great platform or ways. I mean, I think there's just a lot of different things, ways of learning, but you're right. It's just kind of centering in. I totally agree. Um, I can't wait for those to be listening to you and to find you for your upcoming workshops, and then I know you also are you have your own practice. So for those to kind of reach out to you. So what is your website? I'll have it on the show notes too.
Sure. It's LaurenKristonWellness.com. And my name is spelled LaurenKriston, LaurenKristonWellness.com.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. And I thank you for your time and your wealth of knowledge. You were so inspiring because you're not only, communicating to others here, but communicating to all the moms and, giving a voice and helping those kids have a voice when they don't have one. So I really appreciate you sharing your story. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Damaris. Thank you for your work and your time. Thank you.
And thanks, guys, for being on the show. And as we say each and every day, find a mindful way.